Hey everyone, and welcome. All right, today we're going to dive deep into one of React's most powerful performance tools, the useMemo hook. We're going to break down what it is, why you'd even need it, and of course, how to use it to make your apps feel way faster. So let's jump right in. But first, let me ask you something. Do you ever get that feeling that your React app is just working way harder than it needs to? Doing the same calculations over and over and over again with every single click, just wasting valuable resources even when nothing important has changed? If that sounds familiar, you are in exactly the right place. So here's what we're going to cover. We'll start by defining the problem of unnecessary work. Then we'll use a simple analogy to get our heads around it. We'll see the problem in real code, introduce the useMemo solution, then go back and fix that code. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with the key takeaways you need to know. Okay, so let's get right to the core of the issue. The thing with React is, by default, whenever a component re-renders, and I mean for any reason at all, it just runs all the logic inside of it all over again. And this can include some really slow, expensive calculations that honestly probably didn't need to be run again. Now, before we even touch a single line of code, I want to use a super simple analogy to explain this core concept of memoization. It sounds like a fancy, complicated word, but really it just means remembering something. Think of it like giving your app a smart memory. Okay, so imagine this. On one hand, without this smart memory, it's like you're calculating a restaurant bill from scratch every single time you open your wallet. I mean, even if nothing on the bill has changed, it's just a total waste of brain power, right? But on the other hand, with that smart memory, you do the math once, you remember the total, and you only recalculate if, you add a dessert or something changes. One is wasteful, the other is smart and efficient. Well, useMemo is that smart memory for your React components. All right, enough with the analogies. Let's see what this wasted work, this recalculating the bill thing, actually looks like inside a real React component. The setup here is pretty straightforward. We've got a piece of state called count that goes up every time we click a button, causing a re-render. And then we've got this list of numbers that, and this is key, is set one time, and then it never ever changes. Okay, and here's our expensive calculation for this example. We're just filtering our list to find only the even numbers. But to prove when this code is actually running, we've snuck a little console.log in there. It's going to shout filtering at us in the console every single time it executes. And this is the absolute key takeaway right here. Because this logic is just sitting there in the component body, it is going to run again on every single re-render. Even if that re-render has absolutely nothing to do with our numbers array, like when our unrelated counter state changes. And boom, here's the proof. The first time the component loads, we see filtering ... in the console. Okay, that makes sense. But then we click the button. The count on the screen updates to 1. But look at the console. Filtering ... pops up again. We just redid the exact same work on the exact same list of numbers for absolutely no reason. That is just wasted CPU cycles right there. So how do we fix this? How do we stop this pointless work and give our component that smart memory we were just talking about? Well, let's bring in the solution. The useMemo hook. So what is it really? useMemo is a hook that basically lets you save or cache the result of a calculation between re-renders. It remembers the value, and it will only give you a new one when one of the things it specifically depends on has actually changed. It's our wallet analogy come to life. Look, to boil it all down, the entire job of useMemo is to stop your component from doing heavy lifting when it doesn't have to. It's like a guard at the door saying, nope, you don't need to calculate that again. Just use the old value. Okay, enough talk. Let's get our hands dirty, go back to that code, and see the immediate and really powerful difference this fix is going to make. Now, the change here looks pretty small, but trust me, it's a huge deal. We just import useMemo, and then we wrap our entire filtering logic inside of it. So that function becomes the first thing we pass to useMemo. But what's that thing in the square brackets at the end? That second part, the numbers and the square brackets, is called the dependency array. And this is the most important part. It's like the rule book for the hook. We're telling React, hey, this calculation only depends on the numbers variable. So please, only rerun this whole thing if numbers itself actually changes. Otherwise, just don't bother. And here it is, the aha moment. On that first render, sure, we see filtering in the console. We expect that. But now, watch this. When we click the button, the count on the screen goes up to 1, and the console, it's completely silent. Nothing.
Why? Because useMemo was smart enough to know the numbers array didn't change, so it just handed back the result it had already saved. That, right there, is performance optimization in action.
Okay, so you've seen how powerful this is, but that brings up a really important question. When should you actually use it? Let's break down the rules of engagement. All right, you definitely want to reach for useMemo when a few things are true. First, if the calculation is actually slow or computationally expensive. We're talking filtering huge arrays, complex data transformations, that kind of thing. It's also a lifesaver if your component re-renders a lot, and if the value you're calculating depends on stuff that doesn't change on every one of those renders. Now, this is just as important, maybe even more so. You should not wrap everything in useMemo. Seriously. For really simple, fast calculations, like just adding two numbers, the hook itself adds a tiny bit of overhead. And in those cases, that overhead can actually be more expensive than just redoing the math. So be strategic. Don't just sprinkle it everywhere. So there you have it. We've seen how useMemo is like a smart memory for your components, stopping them from doing unnecessary work and making your whole app feel snappier. And so the question I want to leave you with is this. Now that you've got this tool in your toolbox, what's the next performance bottleneck you can go out and solve in your own app? Thanks for tuning in.